All right, Indra. So this is what they call a breezeway, and so there's going to be plenty of breeze up here during our conversation. There was one 4-word sentence in the book that caught my attention. Actually, much caught my attention, but there was a sentence which was, "I believe in companies." Can you explain to our business school students why you believe in companies?
I never thought I was going to start that part of the book. But, go on to say that capitalism has been a glorious thing for the world. It's lifted so many people from, poverty to success, to prosperity. It's fueled innovation, entrepreneurship. I'm a product of capitalism. And capitalism exists when you have companies. Without companies, there's no capitalism. So at a time when people are having sort of mixed feelings about the corporate world, mixed feelings about whether companies are a force for good in society or really a force for inequality and creating too much wealth for a few, I actually believe that capitalism, played the right way through the right companies, is really a force for good. So at the root of my thinking is companies are the right way to think about corporate America, the corporate world in total. At the margin, there is some room for improvement, but I, in my core, believe that companies are a force for good and can be an engine for growth and for doing good in society.
So last week we had the Dean of the Yale School of Management, your alma mater, and the Yale School of Management was a unique concept when it was launched. And I wonder if you knew when you went to the Yale School of Management that it had this unique sense of social purpose.
Well, I went to SOM because of the public and private management, and I retained my MPPM degree. We had the choice of giving it up or keeping MPPM. I kept the MPPM degree. I'd almost say that Yale taught me a lot of the things I did when I was at PepsiCo. And today, if you're going to create a new business school, you'd probably call it the Masters in Public and Private Management, because at its core, companies are rooted in society, and companies succeed when societies succeed. So it almost behooves companies to make sure that the societies in which they operate in around the world are successful. And all that SOM taught me when I was there was, don't forget that you have a duty of care to society when you're a corporate leader. And I thought it was prescient then, and I think it's even more prescient today because the world needs more citizenship in the thinking of corporate leaders.
So let's just piggyback on that, the concept of performance with purpose. Mm-hmm. I'll just clarify for everybody that when the Yale School of Management was formed, they did not offer an MBA degree. They offered a master in public and private management. Yeah. And that is the MPPM that Indra is referring to. Later they changed that degree to an MBA degree for competitive reasons, but gave all of their MPPM alumni the option of retaining that degree. So performance with purpose was really a concept that probably had been gestating for many years, but finally you had a CEO position where you could actually activate it. What was it about, and what were the biggest challenges in seeing it through?
Well, in its core, performance with purpose was just a way to future-proof the company. Because I wanted PepsiCo to be successful for decades, not just for the duration of my leadership. A typical CEO ran the company for 6 years those days. So if I was thinking of running the company for 6 years, I could have cut as many of the costs and investments and generated tremendous EPS, retired, and then the next CEO comes in and says, that was a lousy CEO. Take a big charge and then create alpha, which is what happens always. There's a boom splat. I didn't want that to happen. I thought my job was to run PepsiCo for the duration of the company, which is for decades, which meant that I had to look and see what PepsiCo needed to do today to be successful into the future. So we took a hard look at the future, the mega trends into the future, and it indicated that we had to make changes today to be successful over the next decade. Remember, PepsiCo was a very successful company when I inherited it. So it's very hard to transform a successful company. When you have a burning platform, you can articulate the agenda for change and make it happen. Because we were a successful company, I had to articulate an outside-in perspective, a future-backed perspective. So by talking about the big changes that were going to happen, and then starting to make changes in PepsiCo to future-proof it, I could encapsulate the program in terms of performance with purpose. We're going to continue to deliver performance, but our sense of purpose was on 3 planks: transforming the portfolio to include healthier products with a real focus on environmental issues. Because PepsiCo used a lot of water, we had lots of trucks on the road, our carbon footprint was not particularly pretty, and we generated a lot of plastic, one-way plastic. So how do we improve the environmental footprint? But the one that really touched me in profound ways was what we wanted to do with people. We wanted employees to feel like PepsiCo was a place where they could have a life and a livelihood. We wanted them to bring their whole self to work. We wanted to treat them as talent, not tools of the trade. So the 3 planks of product, planet, and people combined with performance is what led to performance with purpose. And interestingly, today you look at it, it was very logical and sensible. But in those days, people said, if it ain't broke, why fix it? And somehow, the part that bothered me the most when I was doing that, every person I talked with, investors, leaders, had all changed their eating and drinking habits to eat healthier or drink healthier. They were all worried about the environment. But for some reason, they didn't want us to make the changes. And so when you ask them, why don't you want us to change the portfolio? We're going to sell more of the old products, but we're also going to make good-for-you products. They'd say, because if we wanted a company to make good-for-you products, we'll go and invest in a good-for-you company. You keep doing the fun-for-you products. I said, but wait a second. If we keep doing that, our growth rate will slow down. That's okay. You become a cash cow, they said. Nobody wants to work for a cash cow. People want to work for a growth company because growth is oxygen, and unless you have that oxygen from growth, the best talent doesn't stick around. If you tell somebody, come and work for my company, it's a cash cow, nobody's going to come work for it. So growth was always, what was required. And, it took a lot of convincing people to say that for PepsiCo to be successful in the future, we had to remain a growth company, we had to transform the company, and the pathway we were on was the right way to go about it.
So what are the biggest challenges when you're doing these major transformations? I mean, this required a major culture shift. I think the 3 words used in the book are nourish, replenish, and cherish. Cherish, I think, is the people component. Was that the toughest of the 3 to change?
Well, nourish was the toughest because people kept saying, you can't change Pepsi. Hang on, I don't want to change Pepsi, but I'm going to launch Diet Pepsi. I'm going to do healthier drinks, 0-calorie products with some nutrition, oatmeal drinks, Tropicana juice with added nutrients. So we're going to think about new products. But when it came to core Pepsi itself, we're going to reduce the sugar in the blue can Pepsi. You won't know as a consumer that we've reduced the sugar. So you can't reduce 25% of the sugar at one shot. But if you start inching the sugar down, a 1/4 teaspoon every 3 months, you'll never know that we've reduced the sugar. So in many markets around the world, from the time I started to the time I left, the blue can Pepsi is something between 15 and 20% less sugar. Nobody noticed it. The Frito-Lay products were fried in, thank you. The Frito-Lay products were fried in a heart-healthy sunflower oil. But let me tell you the irony of it. Sunflower oil is very expensive. We had to actually grow the sunflower in Mexico, make the oil, and bring it here. It's a high oleic sunflower oil, which is heart-healthy. So our team was so thrilled about frying the chips in sunflower oil because everybody feels good about producing a heart-healthy oil. So they put a big sunflower in front of the package around Lay's. Our consumer complaints went through the roof. The chips taste terrible. Okay, so the next week, we took out the sunflower from the package, kept frying it in sunflower oil. And they said, thank God you changed. It tastes great now. But you see, we had to go through all of these interesting ins and outs because it's hard to change consumer habits if you announce it too much. But if you sneak healthiness, sneak goodness into the products, a little bit at a time, it actually works. On Lay's potato chips, I mean, these are factoids which you can pass on to others. A single-serve bag of Lay's, a small bag of Lay's, has less salt than a slice of bread. Has less salt than a slice of bread because in bread, you need salt as a leavening agent. In Lay's potato chips, it's a surface salt. So our scientists cut the size of the crystal and applied it sparingly on the chip. So they came up with a new method to apply the salt on the chip. And so with less salt, 25% less salt from where we started, you still had the same salty feeling as you did 6 years ago when we started the project. So it was an R&D breakthrough in many, many ways. And it was a fantastic R&D team, fantastic marketing teams. And not just us, I think the industry came together and said, let's reduce the calorie content of our products. And as part of an industry coalition, the Healthy Weight Commitment Foundation, we took out 4.5 trillion calories from the US diet in 3 years, and 6 trillion calories in 5 years, not self-reported, as measured by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So I think that that was the toughest project from an R&D perspective, from a marketing perspective, from a consumer perspective, from a fear factor. Will we do something that will make demand drop off? Fortunately, by tinkering with all the levers carefully, we managed to keep the growth going.
I want to ask you about the recruitment of the chief scientific officer, because that story is a great story about patiently waiting for the right person. Tell us about that.
Well, you know, PepsiCo was a development company. It wasn't a research company, because most of the products we launched in snacks were flavor variations. For example, we could launch nacho cheese Doritos, nacho cheesier Doritos, flaming hot nacho cheesy Doritos. You know, and we could go on. I mean, I could just keep adding IER to all of these names. We would have new products forever. But we wanted new flavors, new platforms. For example, when we watch people eat Tostitos with salsa, the salsa would fall on the ties or the shirts. So our scientists came up with Tostito scoops, which is very hard to make because you have to mold each corn chip like a scoop and fry it so that you don't lose the shape. Then you scoop the salsa. So I'm giving you behind the scenes look at the new product development process. But for all of this, we needed fundamental research in operations, fundamental research in formulations, fundamental research in thinking through new machines to dispense beverages. So there was a lot of fundamental work that needed to be done. We didn't have that R&D capability in PepsiCo. So we had to go out to hire people who could do that. And not only just people who could be good at doing this, we needed a leader who could attract great talent. So we looked, and all the people I interviewed just didn't make it until this person walked in who was head of all of R&D for Takeda Pharmaceuticals, ran a $4.5 billion budget, and he understood exactly what we needed to do. Then he laughed at me and he said, look, my budget is $4.5 million. Your budget is a fraction of $4.5 billion, literally a fraction. Why would I come to PepsiCo? And I told him, look, Memo, the reason you should come to PepsiCo is because in Takeda, you cannot taste the products you make. In PepsiCo, you can taste every product you make. And so you can make change on a much broader basis, and you're going to be impacting billions of servings every day. Mahmood Khan joined us. He attracted an incredible base of scientists to come to PepsiCo and was perhaps the best hire that I ever made in the company. Just a phenomenal human being.
And it took 6 months of persuasion.
6 months
You
of
waited
cajoling,
6 months.
Yep. 6 months.
You
yep.
didn't move on to someone else. That to my
Well,
mind
when you
was
get
very
hooked on
interesting.
somebody, you come at it every other way to somehow get them, because in your heart, you know this is the right person. It's not a money issue. He didn't indicate at all that more money would get him over the finish line. It was just him trying to wrap his head around $4.5 billion, I'm changing lives, I'm saving lives to a fraction. And how will I be perceived in my pharmaceutical community when I tell them I'm gone from Takeda to PepsiCo?
Yes.
So I had to give him a good reason to come to PepsiCo. It was an emotional hire.
I'm sure, for both. Let's go back in time to Chennai. And there are a few stories there that catch the imagination regarding pop groups and cricket pitches. So you've been a pioneer since day one, and I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about some of those stories and also why you think you were leading in this way from such an early age.
Well, you know, I was born in India 8 years after India got independence. So think of it. India got independence in 47, I was born in 55. India had no idea what it was going to be. It had been under occupation for 350 years. And it had just become a country unto its own. And I grew up in the South in a very conservative family at a time when girls didn't really go to college. Men were educated, girls were married off at age 18. Parents found you a guy, you married. You know, people lived supposedly happily ever after. So I'm born into a family where my grandfather's a judge and my father's a master's in mathematics, and they both decide the women are going to be educated and can do whatever they want. So in a way, I won the lottery of life. And my poor mother, who never went to college because her parents couldn't afford it, vicariously lived her life through her daughter, saying, I couldn't do it, maybe I should let them do it. But society said, hey, you better get them married at age 18, otherwise we're going to shun you. So she had one foot on the brake, one foot on the accelerator. But my grandfather and father basically said, perish the thought, these girls are going to soar. Our grandson is also going to do well, but these two girls should be allowed to dream, should be allowed to soar. And I was a middle child. You know, middle children have it tough because the first child is revered, the little child is loved, the middle child is sort of confused. And I was that middle child. And I always wanted some attention, never got it. So my sister and I went to a Catholic school, and one of the girls there was playing the guitar. I found another old guitar, and the nuns, the Irish nuns, agreed to refurbish it for me, and we started an all-girls band, which was like the talk of the town in 70s India. We were awful in retrospect, but then we thought the sun rose and set on us. We only knew 5 songs, but we always played to packed audiences. And then when I went to college, the men all played in cricket teams, and I wondered why women shouldn't play cricket. My mother was mortified. Women cricket, what's wrong with you? I said, good, now we're going to start a women's cricket team. So we started the first women's cricket team in our college, and then we played intercollegiate cricket with other women's colleges that had started cricket teams, and had a great time playing women's cricket. And now come full circle, I'm the only woman on the International Cricket Council. So I've come full circle to now sitting on the governing body of cricket, and I think back to those days when coming out on the field in my whites as the opening batswoman was quite in retrospect, quite an amazing feat.
Fantastic. So then you went through college. I was interested that you studied chemistry like Margaret Thatcher. Anything special about chemistry that bears on leadership potential?
Well, you've got to be brilliant to study chemistry. No, that's a joke. You know, I loved chemistry. I loved pottering around with chemicals, and I always thought I'd be a chemist when I grew up. It was either a doctor or a chemist, one of the two. And I always dreamed I'd be a chemist. I have no idea why I loved the subject as much as I did. So I had chemistry, physics, mathematics group, and you know, I enjoyed math, I enjoyed physics, and you know, I think mathematics, all science is a great fundamental subject to have in your arsenal. Because as I came into PepsiCo, without math, I couldn't have done my job. I'll be very honest with you. Without chemistry, I couldn't have talked to my scientists at all. And I would meet with my science leader, my R&D leaders, every 3 months. And I'd give them 4 or 5 major breakthrough questions I wanted answered. And then they'd go off and say, these are CEO questions. They'd come back with amazing solutions to these problems. I'll give you one example. I'm not going to give you all of them because some of them are proprietary, but I'll give you one. You know, when we squeeze oranges in our orange juice plants, a lot of the fiber stays in the orange peels, and they're just thrown away for animal waste. The question is, how do you reclaim the fiber from the peels and put it back in the juice to create a high-fiber orange juice? How do you extract that? The way the scientists solved it was pretty amazing. So you couldn't have understood what the scientists were saying if you didn't understand something on formulation, something on chemistry and science. So I think all of those early disciplines stood me in good stead later on in life.
I want to fast forward to your first role coming out of Yale with Boston Consulting Group. What did you gain from all of that experience? I think it was maybe 5 or 6 years with BCG?
Yeah, 6 years.
6
and,
years.
You know, with BCG those days, as with all strategy consulting firms, you know, you're taught to go into a company, an industry, and quickly understand the levers of profitability, what drives success in this industry. Because they don't hire you because you know the industry well. They hire you because you have a way of thinking about the industry and bringing frameworks from other industries to bear on the industry you're working on. So I'd worked on industries as far-reaching as paper, chemicals, bottling equipment, orange juice squeezing machinery. Think about how prescient all of that was. I worked on wills and trusts. I worked on air conditioning equipment. So the industries I worked on were extremely varied because in BCG we had a rule that if you worked in one industry for a company, you couldn't work for another company in the same industry, which made sense. So you couldn't work for, you know, 2 consumer products companies. So I worked on maybe 10 or 12 companies that were in 10 or 12 industries. I learned so much about how to enter an industry, quickly learn what are the value drivers, what drives shareholder value, and then think about how to advise the CEO on what they needed to do to, you know, improve the profitability or the value creation potential of the company. It was the most amazing experience for 6 years. Traveled a lot, was away from home a lot, but it was a fantastic experience.
But then you decided you needed to join a company, and you had a number of different offers. And why did you take the one that you went with?
Well, I was in a very bad car crash in '86. Had I not been in that car crash, I might have stayed in consulting for maybe 2 more years. Because in consulting, you've got to know when to leave. If you don't leave at the right time, you become a lifer in consulting, which is not the greatest. I would have left it about 8 years, but at 6 years, I was coming back from a client in downstate Illinois, and I have no idea how I got into the accident. I was standing at a 4-way stop. The next thing, I woke up in intensive care. And so it took me about 6 months to begin walking again, and I realized that I couldn't travel and do consulting at all. And I'd lost memory a little bit, so I had to relearn so much. And Motorola came and interviewed me while I was in the hospital and said, we'd like you to join us in corporate strategy. I go, can you see the condition I'm in? I mean, I'm not good for coming to any job. They said, look, when you recover, and you will, we'd like you to join Motorola. So I joined Motorola in '86, working for this German guy who was considered impossible, but didn't care if I was woman or man, tall or short, what my ethnicity was. He hired me for what I could bring to the job. And so I thought that was a fantastic kind of a person to work for. And I joined in the automotive electronics group. Now, I want to tell you honestly, I knew nothing about cars. And I studied physics during the valve days. And now we were in the solid state days. So I didn't know anything about solid state and semiconductors. So I hired myself 2 professors. One professor from the local community college who came to teach me automotive, and another professor from the local college who taught me semiconductors. So 4 days a week, from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m., alternatively, I would take lessons in automotive, semiconductors, automotive, semiconductors. So I learned as much as I could about semiconductors and automotive so that I could do my job. I was never going to design circuitry. I was never going to fix my car. But I had to learn enough to know what's an engine controller, what's electronics for ABS systems, what's a navigation system, what's a car multiplex. I had to learn all that to be able to understand Motorola and the car companies. So in every job, I had to learn the business from the ground up, which means I had to learn the nitty-gritty of the business and then work my way up.
So when you left Motorola, you left with Gerhard. And there's a very interesting comment, I think, from George Fisher in the book, who was, if I remember, the CEO or the chairman of Motorola, which was, you're leaving an institution for an individual, and that's not a good career move.
That's the only time I left an institution for an individual, because Gerhard was a very difficult boss, an extremely difficult boss. But I learned so much from him because, you know, in those days, there were hardly any women in corporate America. And there were no women in the senior leadership levels at all. And many of the women I came across said that they were facing a lot of unconscious bias in their jobs. People would talk over them, roll their eyes when they talked, sort of ignore them when they spoke. And whenever you strip somebody's confidence, you strip their competence. And a lot of the women were facing that doom loop. Gerhard was the opposite. He would build up my confidence always by involving me in things that I didn't even want to get involved. He would say, it's good for you. Come to this meeting and sit down and watch what's going on. He'd call the Sloan School, where he was also lecturing, and say, I can't come now to lecture because I'm busy, but I'm sending Indra to lecture in my place. I'm like, in the Sloan School? You got to be joking me? Because, you know, it was a highly respected place, but he'd say, you can do it. So he built my confidence as opposed to taking down my confidence. He was an incredibly special person. And so I thought it was worth leaving an institution for an individual. On the other hand, when Gerhard left ABB to go to Siemens, and I was not going to follow him anymore, I came to PepsiCo because I came to the institution rather than go to GE, which would have been the individual, because Jack Welch was recruiting me for GE. But I said, no, I'm not going to go work for an individual. I'm going to work for an institution. I came to work for the culture, the environment at PepsiCo, rather than go work for Jack Welch, which should have been closer to my area of expertise. I came to work for PepsiCo.
So I think you talk in terms of Pepsi as an institution that was a talent academy. Can you say a little bit more about that, and how did you get the sense that you could have a lasting career at Pepsi when GE at the time, I think, would have been the more formidable and obvious candidate to most people?
There was a humility in PepsiCo that was just unbelievable. I'll give you the little story. You know, Wayne Calloway was the CEO of PepsiCo then, and he was sitting on the GE board. And I had told both Jack Welch and Wayne Calloway that I would give them a decision on April 15th, which company I was going to accept. And Wayne was on the GE board meeting, and Jack Welch prematurely told Wayne, oh, she's accepted GE, or she's very close to accepting GE. So Wayne Calloway, for those who might have known him, when I interviewed with him for 1 hour, he spoke for 1 minute, I spoke for 59 minutes. Not because I wanted to speak. Wayne never spoke. He just said, That's all he said. People in divisions would say, when you go to Wayne and say, Wayne, you've set me a 15% target for profits, it's too high. Wayne would listen to them, and they would leave with a 17% target, which they developed on their own. So Wayne was that kind of guy who was a strong, silent leader, never spoke. So the day of the GE board meeting, I didn't know it was a GE board meeting, I get a call on ABB. It's from Wayne Calloway. And Wayne says, Indra, I just came from the GE board meeting, and Jack says you're going to accept the GE offer. You told me that you're going to accept on April 15th, and I'm going to take you at your word. I want to make PepsiCo's case to you. And he went on for the next 5 minutes making the case for PepsiCo to me, saying there's nobody like you in the executive ranks. I need somebody like you to come to PepsiCo. We commit to developing you. we commit that you will have a major role to play in the company and you can make major contributions. So I'm not just asking you to come to PepsiCo, I'm actually pleading for you to come to PepsiCo because this is the place for you. He hung up the phone and I said to myself, here is a person who barely spoke in the interview. His reputation is, I don't speak much. He spoke for 5 minutes straight, making the case for PepsiCo, with such humility from a CEO that I've never experienced in my life. And I worked for many CEOs, I worked with many CEOs. At that point, that humility factor just overwhelmed me and I said, this is the guy I'm going to work for. And I left ABB that afternoon, drove over to PepsiCo, and I accepted the job a week ahead of schedule. And I never looked back.
Did you ever hear from Jack?
In fact, 3 weeks after I started at PepsiCo, we had a PepsiCo senior management meeting where Jack was the guest of honor and the key speaker. And it was an awkward moment in the tent when both Wayne and Jack were standing next to each other. Let me tell you about the humility of Wayne. Jack looks at Wayne and says, what the hell did you offer her that she took PepsiCo over GE? In a typical, Jack Welch bravado. And Wayne, in his typical humble way, said, Jack, she tossed a coin. And that was Wayne. He didn't say, oh, PepsiCo's the greatest. He said she tossed a coin.
There were two stories I wanted you to share with the audience on your way through to the CEO position. One was the challenge associated with being the vice president for corporate planning and strategy, where there was a feeling among some people, to quote you from the book, that corporate planning is trying to run the company. So when you're in a staff position like that with a lot of high ego, high octane division presidents, how do you manage that as a senior staff person?
It's a big game and a big charade because in PepsiCo, when you had multiple divisions, you have to manage the street. And so corporate planning would run the models to sort of decide where the EPS was going to end up for the quarter. And the presidents would tell us, I'm going to miss by $10 million, make sure somebody else makes up for it. But then when they came to the meetings and they saw their numbers as presented by corporate planning, they'd say, oh, we didn't take our numbers down by 10 million. So it was all a big game. But at the meeting, you felt terrible because I'm presenting and the division president goes, corporate planning is trying to run my business by taking me down 10 million. In reality, he called me the previous day saying, just make sure you flash that I'm going to be under-delivering by 10 million. You do it once, it's okay. You do it twice, it's okay. But if you spend 6 meetings telling every other division president that corporate planning is trying to run you and put you down, you've lost me. So one fine day I said, you know what, I quit. I don't need this anymore. I don't need division presidents telling me that I'm running their business when all I'm trying to do is do my job. So I walked into Roger Enrico's office. He was the CEO at that time, and I said, Roger, I've had enough of this division presidents insulting me. I quit. I don't want severance. I don't want a bonus. I don't want anything. Tomorrow, after the board meeting, I'm leaving. I'm just leaving the company. It's been wonderful being with you. This was in 97, 98. Roger looked at me with this look of horror, and he said, I'll talk to you later. I left, went to my office, getting ready for the board meeting. That day, the division president's meeting was delayed 3 hours. And at the end of 3 hours, every division president loved me. Oh my God, they loved me. They absolutely loved me. And Roger Enrico came to me the next day and said, let's get on with life. So nobody said, I hope you're staying, can I give you more money? None of that stuff. He just said, let's get on with life.
There was another story around you learning the right side of the decimal point. Previously, you hadn't been looking so closely at that. You'd been involved in M&A activity and so forth. So can you tell our students, why the right side of the decimal point is so important for a leading executive to focus on?
When you're doing transactions and transformations, we did between 1994 and 2000 maybe 50, 60 billion dollars of transactions between mergers, acquisitions, divestitures, all of that stuff. So, you know, you get to a point where you can do that in your sleep because you know exactly how these things work with the bankers, structure the deal, you write all these offering documents. Somehow, you know, it became a routine until Steve Reinemund, who was running Frito-Lay, became president of the company. And he said, you know, Indra, you've been very good at doing everything to the left of the decimal in hundreds of millions, billions of dollars. But the way the company makes money is small pennies on a bag of chips or a route. So we have to think about cost management at a very, very granular level. So in addition to your job as head of corporate strategy, I'm now going to have you re-engineer the Frito-Lay route system. There were 15,000 trucks on the road from Frito-Lay, and he said, we need to take a couple of pennies off of every drop. The cost, you know, take out 2 pennies of cost. It sounds simple, but it's not. There's technology involved. There's redoing the whole route structure, separating the routes between large format grocery stores and small format convenience stores. It's about moving the picking from the back of the truck all the way to the warehouse. It's just a massive undertaking. I said, Steve, how am I going to do both jobs at the same time? He said, that's for you to figure it out. But if you don't learn the right of the decimal, you'll never understand how money is made in PepsiCo at the very granular level. So Monday through Friday, I'd go to Dallas. I'd work on Frito-Lay route engineering. And Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I'd work on my corporate strategy and CFO jobs. I wasn't CFO at that time. I'd just taken on some of those jobs, but I'd work on that. And in between, take care of my kids and the home. But I learned a lot. In a way, it was a brutal lifestyle, but Steve pushing me to learn the right of the decimal was the right thing.
So I think it's time to talk about Raj and family and balance and how to achieve all of this.
Balance? You know, I'm married for about 42 years, and I have 2 daughters. My husband is the best decision I made, the choice of my husband, best decision I made. And he's been, you know, he has a career of his own, was a partner in a consulting firm, has done amazing things, but he's been with me every step of the way till today. I lived in a multi-generational home, so anytime we needed help with the kids, either my mother or my in-laws always came to help. Multi-generational living is fantastic, but it's also got tensions associated with it. I'll just give you one example. When my mother lived with us, and we had 1 daughter, she'd let Preetha watch TV until 10 o'clock. And Raj would say, she has to go to bed at 8. Mom would say, I brought up 3 kids, all of them turned out great, I know what to do. And you go, wait a sec, Raj, relax. If she walks out, we don't have help. And he'll say, but she's ruining our child. The child's going to be fine, I turned out okay. But there was no TV when you grew up. You're right, but just bear with it. You know? So you become the diplomat going between your mother and your husband, and it has its own tensions. But on balance, I wouldn't do it any other way. The problem was, in those days, it was a big juggling act between kids and home and family and the work, because there was no technology. The pager was the most advanced technology. Even cell phones was this huge Dynatag. Do you remember that? You know, it looked like a massive machine. Remember that one? It's a brick, exactly. And we had AT&T calling cards, which we used to call people. So you couldn't communicate freely with your kids. There was no Zoom, no FaceTime, no smartphone. The internet was barely there. So we traveled everywhere on commercial flights. So everything was a big juggle. Later on, as these technologies came in, one could balance life a little bit more, because if today's technologies were available when I was CEO, I would have traveled 50% less. I'd have been in communication with my kids a lot more than I was when those technologies didn't exist. And I may have been an even better parent than I ended up being. I have to be honest with you. I didn't miss any mother-daughter liturgy. I never missed major lacrosse games or ice hockey games my kids played in. I was on the school board as a trustee. I've never missed a school trustee meeting, never missed. People who stayed at home missed trustee meetings. I never missed a single trustee meeting. Sister Joan McNetty would always say, wherever in the world Indra was, she would be there for a trustee meeting. But my kids didn't notice those things. They noticed the fact that I wasn't there for a class coffee on Wednesday mornings, which is, I think, a plot against working women, pardon me. Because how can we go to a class coffee on Wednesday mornings at 9 a.m. for 2 hours? We can't do it. So it was always, Mom, you didn't show up for class coffee. Yep, I didn't show up. So did Mrs. Rag and Mrs. Atubara, they didn't show up too. How come you don't notice them? No, but you didn't show up. So it was always that knife that went in and turned. But you know what? They turned out okay. No mother is ever perfect. Mothers are the punching bags, I think, for daughters in particular. But somehow we juggled, we balanced, we co-opted all kinds of people, and we survived.
And that relates to what you're working on now and what you're passionate about today.
Well, the biggest issue, I was the co-chair of Reopen Connecticut when COVID hit. And I saw two things. One, while we focused a lot on women in managerial levels and how to bring them to the top levels of companies, the bigger problem we had was the frontline workers who had zero flexibility through COVID. But even in Connecticut, we would tell people who were working in hospitals or senior centers that they had to come into work because you couldn't do it flexibly or remotely. But once they came into work in a senior center, they had to be there for 2 weeks. Because if they went home every day, they could bring the COVID with them. But when they came in and stayed in the senior care center, the hospital for 2 weeks, we never asked them, who's going to take care of your kids? Who's going to take care of the older people in your homes? And many of the nurses came from the inner cities in Connecticut, and they were taking care of their aging parents. And that was a big outage in the way we thought about things. So we realized that for all the talk we have about childcare for the office-going executives, which makes a lot of sense because a lot of the entry-level people need childcare to stay in the job, we also need to worry about a care infrastructure for the frontline workers who need care for regular hours and for non-traditional hours, especially those that are working the second and the third shift. So we're doing a lot of work now to figure out how we can bring a care infrastructure to them so that they can have children and still engage in paid work, supporting the backbone of the life that we're used to.
And what do you how are you spending your time these days? 100% on this issue or a diverse portfolio?
A diverse portfolio, I'd say, because you cannot work on this 100% because it's in the political arena. So I'm not a political person, so I have to work through organizations already working in this area. So I have to tiptoe my way gingerly through this issue. You know, I sit on the board of Amazon, I sit on the board of Philips. I was teaching at the US Military Academy in West Point until last week. I sit on the board of Memorial Sloan Kettering, MIT, the National Gallery of Art. So I have a varied portfolio. I'm having a great time. Busier than ever, but the one thing I don't have is the quarterly earnings pressure, which is liberating. You know, when I was running PepsiCo, for 2 years ahead, I knew my calendar. For 1 year ahead, I knew it programmed down to the day. Now, if I want to take a nap in the afternoon, I say, I'm going to take a nap in the afternoon. And I feel guilty. That's the funny part. I shut my office door or I stay home and I take a nap and I go, I hope nobody's noticing. Then who cares? I'm retired. I can do whatever I want. I haven't gotten there as yet. I'm getting there.
All right, so I think we've got time for 2 or 3 questions. So we want to get some students in as well. So one thing I never do is ask the first question of the person in the front row because you never know what you're going to get. So let's get someone from the hinterlands if we could. Do we have a student out there who'd like to ask a question? Quickly, yes, I see a hand there. Could you stand up and just introduce yourself?
And there's a question here too.
Hello? There we go. Hello there, my name is Leah Cohen. I'm a senior at the university studying finance and marketing with a concentration in sustainable business. And I was just curious, how much do you believe that corporations need to take a more environmental, sustainable lens and responsibility as the main, producers and contributors to carbon emissions these days?
So let me make sure I understood your question. You're asking me how seriously are corporations taking the whole environmental sustainability
How much
issue?
of a responsibility do you believe they need to take?
Yeah, I think it's still in its early stages. I think 5-10 years ago it was viewed as the ESG police coming after us. Today it's becoming more mainstream because people are looking at the impacts of climate change all around them. I think the young people in companies are forcing corporate leaders to actually change their models. Now, the funny thing is, environmental initiatives don't have to cost money. They actually unleash cost savings. All the environmental work we did, we saved about $600 million a year. So if you frame it as a shareholder value creating initiative, it's much more palatable than if you look at it as a corporate social responsibility which takes costs. So I think it's just a lens with which you frame it. And if you frame it in a value-creating way, people take it very, very seriously.
All right, Ambassador Comp, please.
Terrific presentation. Thank you very much. We learned so many important lessons today, particularly the importance of humility. And it came through, and I hope all the students really appreciated that. My question relates, and it's a long time interest in how successful people of Indian descent have been successful in American business. The CEO of Google, Microsoft, 30, 40 other companies. Why hasn't that translated to India producing those great companies? Why are they here, like you? Why are you here as the CEOs of important businesses? Why hasn't India made that transformation?
That's a great question. I think that India has the demographic dividend, enormous population, 1.2 billion people, a lot of young people. I think the largest percentage of the population below age 25. So you've got lots of up-and-coming leaders in India. The Indian companies are all chock full of talent. And if you look at the many IT companies, if you look at the big conglomerates in India, they are chock-a-block full of talent. A lot of the people who've come here and become CEOs came 10 or 15 years ago. They're not coming today. They came maybe even 20 years ago. They came here to do their masters and their PhDs in disciplines that did not exist in India then. And there was no seamless flow of talent between the two countries. But once they came here, remember, they understand democracy because they grew up in the world's largest. They were now functioning in the world's oldest. And second, they all had education in English. So they came here, they could easily integrate into the American culture. But the more important thing is, in those days, and even today I'd say, the US was always looked at as the beacon of innovation, invention, hope, culture, the greatest in the world. So people came here with a sense of, the future is going to be fantastic because we're in the US, sense of optimism. And they came here and thrived. The young people today are increasingly choosing to stay back and grow and develop there. But I'll also say something to you, and if you read my book, you'll find a reference there. I was in Chequers, which is the Camp David equivalent for the British Prime Minister, having lunch with one of the British Prime Ministers, and he asked me, he said, Indra, when you went to the United States, when you did, why didn't you come here to the United Kingdom? I said to Mr. Prime Minister, had I come here, I wouldn't be having lunch with you. And I genuinely mean that. Only in the United States could somebody like me, a woman from an emerging market, a person of color, come in and run an iconic American company. I am a uniquely American story, as is the head of Google, the head of Microsoft, the head of Twitter, the head of Arista Networks. You can pick any number. I think this corporate environment encourages talent, and in spite of all of our self-criticism, it is hell of a meritocracy.
We'll take one last question at the front.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here, for sharing your story and your wisdom with us. I know that I'm not alone, I'm sure, in feeling completely inspired by you. And on that note, I'm sure many of us business students would love to hear if you have any advice or recommendations. What would you give to us, knowing that many of us here would love to have dreams of having an impactful life, an impactful career like you have had? What suggestions, recommendations would you give to us?
Let me start off by saying, when you graduate from business school, don't say, I want to be CEO. Because the minute you say that, you lose all sense of what you have to do, because you're so obsessed with climbing the corporate ladder. Just tell yourself you're going to do the job that you're given exceedingly well, surpassing anybody's expectations. Just focus on that. Second, put your hand up for the toughest assignments. Nobody notices you because you took something that's running well and kept it running well. But if you take on something that has got issues and you turned it around or fixed it, people go, hey, what's your name?
I'm Aaron.
Aaron. They'll say, Aaron's a good guy. We've got to really watch out for him. So put your hands up for the toughest assignments. Every company has politics. Understand the politics, but do not play in the politics. Especially women. Never, ever get into the politics, because they love to brand women as being political. And I'll say that to men too. Understand the politics, but don't play in the politics. And I'll tell you one more thing that stood me in good stead through my entire life. Understand what your proposition is for the company. People have got to be able to say, Aaron is a go-to man for this. What is that proposition that you're going to present to the company? Work hard on that. Because just being another good employee, there's so many of you in the company. And I'll just leave you with this picture of the math. In PepsiCo, if you think of the pyramid, it's a pyramid. The CEO sits on top, right? About 15,000 people enter in the managerial levels. By the time you get to one level below the CEO, there's only 15 people, and there's one CEO. So if you want to rise to the top, you're going to have to do better than everybody else to move up, while the world is changing around you. So you've got to be a lifelong student and do better than everybody else. And by the time you get to about the third level from the top, it's either up or out. Because if you don't move up, you're a blocker. So the stakes go up. So you've got to understand this math and retool yourself constantly for the future with an insatiable curiosity, understanding your proposition and fine-tuning it. So think of it as a march, but every step has to be deliberately taken. But if you start off saying, I'm going to skip a few and run for the CEO-ship, you will just fall in a ditch. Don't even think about it. You'll be out very, very fast. Finally, I'll say to you guys, don't forget your family, your friends, and your faith. That's my plea to you. At the end of the day, job can come today and go tomorrow. The only thing that stays with you is your family, your friends, and your faith. Without that, I'd be a nobody.
So I hope you weren't expecting a shortcut. All right, so we're at the end of the hour. We're at the end of the hour, and I've been sitting here for 60 minutes worried that the palm tree is going to fall on Indra. But I think that even if you were here in a Category 1 hurricane, you would be unflappable. So we really appreciate the hour, and it's been fantastic to have you grace us with your presence and good humor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. Thank you for a wonderful interview.